from Brussels, and welcome to this session. Once again, good morning from Brussels. I'm Anna Kacic from the Interpreting Service of the European Commission, and I'll be moderating this session. And before we start, I'm just going to introduce my three panelists. Also before I introduce my guests, just in case not everybody has been able to connect and hear and see us properly as yet, I would just like to encourage you to use the chat and the questions and answers function as well, because first and foremost, we'd like to use this as an interactive session. We'd like to be as interactive as possible in order to make sure that we don't talk at you, but to you and with you. And in order to do that effectively, we need to know who you are. Now, unfortunately, we can't see you, but we can most certainly see what you're writing in the chat. We also have some technical support staff who are there to assist us. So do please feel free to let us know what your thoughts and ideas are, what your questions are, etc. Because basically this session is first and foremost in order to show that although the UK has formally left the European Union, the English language most certainly has not. And we still have a great need for English-speaking interpreters at the EU institutions. And that's where you come in. And we are hoping to show you in the course of this session that we do have attractive job proposals for you and job opportunities. And we very much hope that you will see it that way too. Now, before we start, we're going to launch a poll as well, where we're asking you 3 questions. And it's just so we know who we are addressing here. The first question, you will see it in the poll, but I'm just going to read them out as well whilst we're getting started. Are you an English native speaker? Are you a linguist by profession? Maybe a teacher or whatever. And the third question, would you like to work as an interpreter for the EU? Now, we really would like you to answer these questions so that we can provide you with more targeted answers. Thank you very much for participating. I can see that people are active already. Now, whilst you're answering the polls, I'm going to introduce my panelists. We have representatives from all 3 institutions. First of all, the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, Kathy Petersens. From the European Parliament, Miguel Gomes, and from the European Commission, my very own head of unit, Morag Neith. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves in their own words, and seeing as this is today being hosted by the Commission, I'm going to give the floor to Morag first.
Thank you very much, Anna, and good morning to everyone out there. My name is Morag Neith, and I am head of the English and Irish Interpretation Unit at the European Commission. Our service is the biggest interpreting service in the world. We work not just for the European Commission, but also for the Council of Ministers, for committees and various agencies. So I look forward to our discussion here this morning with you. Thank you.
Kathy?
Hi, my name is Kathy Petersens. I work as a staff interpreter at the Court of Justice. The Court is the institution that hears any disputes relating to EU law. And I've been working there since 2008 in the English booth.
And last but not least, Miguel from our most multilingual institution, the European Parliament.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Miguel Gomes. I'm head of English and Irish interpreting at the European Parliament. The European Parliament actually has the largest service of the European Union in terms of volume of work and of multilingual meetings. So I take a little bit of issue with that first point there, but that's not the issue of this session. Anyway, happy to be here.
Okay, thank you all. So basically, like I said at the outset, this session is all about job opportunities for English-speaking interpreters in the EU institutions, and also about the changing needs for interpretation post-COVID. Now, you might think that there's less need for interpretation, but it's not necessarily true. What is true is that things have changed. We are using new technologies more and more, but it is all exciting as well, as it also opens up new opportunities. Also, what I said before about English still being an official language of the EU, and actually, incidentally, on the 1st of January next year, 2023, marks the 50th anniversary of English becoming the official language of the EU. And other than being a preferred second language as well for many people, it is also the language of finance and business. So we still very much need English. And like Kathy said the other day when we were chatting about this, whilst it is relatively easy after Brexit to replace engineers or biologists from the UK by biologists from Spain or Lithuania or what have you, the same doesn't apply to linguists. It's very different because native speakers are like gold dust these days. And particularly if you think in terms of English having been the official language for 50 years by now, we also need to think in terms of the age pyramid that we've got in this profession in the EU institutions, and we very much need to make sure that new people are coming in. Some of you might be afraid that, well, if you only have 1 or 2 languages, it's not enough because there are so many official languages in the EU and you need to speak at least 6 or 7. Well, let me reassure you, none of us started speaking 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 foreign languages. Languages can be learned. And once you're in, we also provide you with a great deal of support and assistance, and we help you learn more. So yes, that's what I'd like to say by way of introduction. And now perhaps I would like to ask my panelists to come in who would like to start the ball rolling. Miguel?
Yes, on the status of English in the EU, it's very important that we bear in mind that since Brexit, sometimes there's some confusion surrounding this. English continues to be an official language of the European Union. In fact, we found that there is huge demand for English, that it has been has even increased slightly since Brexit. Nearly all of the meetings have to have English. Sometimes if we don't have an English booth, we have to cancel a meeting. So we're finding that the status of English for many reasons continues to be pivotal to our system. English is a lingua franca within the EU. Most of our clients speak it as their preferred second language. It's often a bridging language. So these are all reasons why English maintains a central role within our system. The visibility of the institutions is often done through the medium of English. So English interpreting is the most widely listened to channel of our system at the European Parliament, for example. We have a web streaming system for nearly all of our meetings. Most of them are public, and we find invariably that English is the language which attracts by far the greatest number of listeners.
Well, thank you very much. By the way, I don't know if you're seeing the poll results. We have a pretty mixed audience here. It almost looks like the American midterm elections. It's 53% are English native speakers and 47 are not. But I take it their English is also very good as they are participating in this session. And 68% of the audience are linguists and 32 are not. So perhaps we could also say a few words about people who are not linguists coming into this profession. And I think, Kathy, maybe you could come in, particularly at the Court of Justice. That might be an interesting thing because many people are actually lawyers by profession to begin with.
That's true. And from a translation point of view in particular, our translators are known as lawyer linguists because they're lawyers first and linguists second. We need all of the judgments, all of the legal documentation to be translated into all the different languages by people who are really familiar with the right terminology. Being a lawyer is not a requirement to work at the court as an interpreter. It's nice if you have it, that's great. But what we want for interpreters are people who come into the court environment and are interested in and willing to learn the terminology and to figure out how the court cases are structured and how that works out. And the way that we recruit people for interpretation is again a bit different possibly from the other institutions. For freelancers, we don't want to find people necessarily with a very wide range of languages. We recruit by hearing. So if you have a Spanish language hearing, then obviously we're going to be really focused on people who speak Spanish.
Okay, and maybe Morag, would you like to say a few words about this as well?
Yes, thank you very much, Anna. Well, people come from all sorts of different backgrounds into the English booth. We have people from very much a language background, having learned foreign languages at school and then gone on to study languages at university and then trained to be an interpreter. But we also have people who, through their circumstances, have grown up in multilingual households, have lived in different countries, had their schooling in different countries, and maybe have very different first degrees. They've studied economics, they've studied law, they've studied various different subjects and have then come into interpreting. So there really is a very broad mix. I mean, maybe I could suggest that if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about how to become an interpreter, you could watch our webinar from yesterday where we addressed that very issue.
Yes, and actually perhaps I would also like to add on this same topic, some people decide to become interpreters later in life after they've already had a career somewhere else, which is always helpful because we often interpret such diverse and different topics that it's always good, whatever knowledge you have, whatever background knowledge you have about any one of these topics is certainly going to come in useful at some stage. And also, I don't know how many people know this, you can also study interpretation like a postgraduate course after getting your first degree in something totally different. So yes, I would just like to encourage the participants to, once again, some of you may not have heard this, to ask questions in the questions and answers function, because that way we'll make sure that we can address your concerns. I don't know if it's working, hopefully it is. And yes, like I was saying in the beginning, we'd like this to be as much of an interactive session as possible so that we just don't tell you about what we do here, but okay, there is a question, I think. Where are EU interpretation translation jobs advertised? Morag?
Yes, well, I would refer you to our Europa website, which is where we set out all of the details of how to become an interpreter for the EU institutions. Actually, at the end of this session, we'll be sharing with you a QR code, which will then give you all of the relevant links, but you can simply Google interpreting for the EU and it will take you to the right place. But maybe I could just take this opportunity, Anna, to give some information about how you can qualify to become an interpreter and then how you can be accredited with us as an interpreter. Basically, you do need, as a general rule, to do a master's qualification in conference interpreting to be eligible to apply to work as an interpreter for the EU institutions. Although if you have got recognised conference interpreting experience, then that can also be taken into consideration. We work with a system whereby generally interpreters start out as freelance interpreters, so not as staff interpreters. We work with both, and certainly at the Commission the work balance is about 50-50, so half of the work is done by staff interpreters, half of the work is done by freelance interpreters. But in order to become an accredited interpreter, you need to sit an accreditation test with us. And that accreditation test is an interinstitutional one. So if you sit the accreditation test and you pass the accreditation test, then you can work for any of the institutions that are represented here today. So you can work for the court, you can work for the European Parliament, or you can be employed by the European Commission and work for, as I say, various different institutions that the Commission Interpreting Service provides services to. So that's the main route into interpretation, is to pass our accreditation test, and then you are recruited as a freelance. And then what we tend to do further to that is we then have occasional vacancies published for temporary staffing posts, and those are open to all our accredited interpreters.
Thank you, Morag. Whilst we're on the subject, we have another question about how much does an interpreter in the EU earn per day, and what are the working hours? So who'd like to come in on that one? Miguel?
Yes, I'm happy to comment on this, the daily rate, and I've seen also questions about the background of interpreters. The first degree of interpreters can be very varied. Quite often it is a language degree, sometimes in French and Italian, or German and French, or just German. But we have, as has been said, we have interpreters from many different backgrounds. So somebody's asking about finance, I believe, so and options other than law. I have a degree in political science, for example, and on my team I have many people with language degrees, but also with other degrees. It's the masters in conference interpreting which is important, because that actually teaches you to interpret. As Morag was saying, we employ freelance interpreters, and that is the most common option for a conference interpreter, the freelance life, to become a freelance. And we employ freelancers on a daily basis. So you're offered a contract with 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days, and each day is about 450 euros, around 450 euros a day. So it's well paid. It's not just for that day's work, because you're expected to prepare and to be ready for the meetings that you will be assigned to. But it's a very flexible system whereby the freelance interpreters tell us when they're available through a database, and we then offer contracts if we have work during that period. Our services are demand driven.
Thank you very much. Yes, we've had another question about what other sectors are discussed other than law, or and somebody is also asking whether somebody who has a background in finance would be interesting. Definitely, yes. And yes, the sectors vary widely. You may be in a meeting on agriculture in one day, on fisheries the next, and on energy products the day after, and then on civil law the day after. So that's why what Miguel said about not being recruited for 1 day only for that, but you're paid a lot of money in relative terms, because you also have to prepare. It's a job for which you really do need some preparation before you go into a meeting, or even more so a court hearing, where you've got lawyers who know every case inside out, as Kathy can confirm. And at the Court of Justice, there is actually an extra day for preparation, right, Kathy?
Exactly. So we go about it slightly differently. We bring you in and we pay you for a preparation day before you go into the booth. So no one expects you to wander into the booth on your first day knowing everything about the particular hearing. We bring you in, we give you access to the documents, you get to talk to the colleagues you'll be working with, and you get given that full day to prepare for the following day's hearing, so that you do come in feeling confident and well prepared and in command of all the terminology.
We have another question. Would British national applicants still be viewed favorably? Yes, absolutely. It is not about your passport, it's about your competence and your skills. But perhaps Morag can say a few more words about this.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Well, I mean, Kathy is an example of somebody who's not British. You yourself, Anna. We have a mix of nationalities, but of course, Brits are still very, very much welcome. Essentially, you can have any nationality to work as a freelance interpreter, so from any country in the world, and we have, as I say, several different continents represented here today. However, in order to be taken on in a staff position, certainly at the Commission, at the moment, it's not possible to take people who do not have an EU nationality. So obviously that has massively narrowed the possibilities for recruitment for our service. We'll have to see how things pan out over time, and it may be that we need to request some sort of specific derogation in the future. But at the moment, we are stuck with the nationality restriction. But for freelance interpreting, which, as I say, represents 50% of our work, that nationality requirement is not relevant.
And if I may just add, like you quite rightly pointed out, people like Kathy and me, we were not UK nationals when we started working in the English booth. So particularly for the English booth, it has always been the case that people came from all over the place, because there are other English-speaking countries in the world. So that's nothing unusual. We're getting more and more questions, and there is one question about how to apply for, if there is a scheme that one can apply to, but there is also a question about whether we can work remotely in today's world. Well, I think it applies more to work for private clients on the markets outside the EU institutions, because of the confidentiality issues as well. Although there are some remote setups here as well, but perhaps seeing as Parliament is a little bit more advanced than we are in this, Miguel would like to comment on the remote bit, because you do have hubs, don't you, in member state capitals, etc. And this is developed particularly after COVID.
Yes, during COVID, we had to continue functioning. The Parliament of the European Union had to continue to function. Therefore, we introduced remote interpreting at the European Parliament. We've explored many different types of remote interpreting, and we're currently in an intense phase of social dialogue with interpreters to thrash out which ones we will keep in the future. We're definitely keen to keep some possibilities of remote participation. The Parliament has, the MEPs have decided that they want remote participation, so we will have to deliver on proper working conditions now for working in remote. So the simple answer is yes, we are working on this. It's not a panacea, and we have the health and safety of our interpreters as our primary concern. So we're taking prudent steps in that direction, and have experimented with a lot of different techniques. For example, there was a hub in London during the pandemic, which we used to service meetings with a limited number of languages. The European Parliament, most of our languages have 24 languages. Most of our meetings have 24 languages. So we're a very multilingual institution. And that, of course, creates challenges also for the technology.
Okay, thank you very much. We have questions coming in a little bit faster now. So I'm just going to take this one very quickly myself. How long does one meeting usually last? It varies as well. A meeting can last from 9 o'clock in the morning until 6:30 in the afternoon, or it can last for an hour or two, or it can be a marathon and go on through the night. But we can get back to it later if we have time. At any rate, it differs. It depends on the subject matter, on all sorts of things. Also, somebody is asking about whether they can sit the test, the accreditation test, with on the basis of a master's degree from the University of Alicante in Spain. I think a master's degree, it doesn't really matter where you get it for, as long as it's a recognized degree. And it links in with the whole point on the newcomers scheme. So perhaps I think Morag was going to answer that one, but I don't see her right now. So perhaps we can move on to.
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
If you like,
I lost you for a second. Yeah.
Okay. No, yes, of course I can answer that question on the newcomers scheme, because that's something that's very specific to the European Commission. Although I know that that Kathy would be able to say a little bit more about a traineeship scheme that the court has. So maybe you could give her the floor afterwards. But just coming back to that question on Alicante, just to add to what you said, yes, the qualification can be from anywhere in the world. However, it does have to be a conference interpreting qualification. There are many courses that are available out there that have a small, for instance, public service interpreting component, but are predominantly translation courses. We need to have a conference interpreting qualification for that to be eligible. So I don't know the specific status of that course in Alicante and how much of that course is actual conference interpreting. So I can't answer specifically, but you can send your question in, as I say, again, through that Europa website, and you would be able to check there your eligibility. Now, moving on to the newcomers scheme, this is something which we offer every year to a handful of people who are successful in our accreditation tests. And essentially what it means is you're guaranteed 100 days of work over the first 18 months after you pass your accreditation test. Now, 100 days might not sound like a huge number of days, but really it's certainly enough to make a decent living for the first year and a half after you've passed the accreditation test. And don't forget that for a day in the booth, you need to do quite a lot of prep. And you're also still working on consolidating your technique and consolidating your languages. So actually 100 days is a very good starting point. And you can work for other employers. So it's 100 days that you get from the Commission, but you can accept days from the Parliament, you can accept days from the court, and you can accept days on the private market. One of the big advantages of the newcomer scheme is that it enables you to really integrate into the job. And it also is very useful for people, in particular at the moment Brits, but I've also got, for example, a South African on the newcomers scheme at the moment. It's very useful for people who don't have an EU nationality and who want to move to Brussels and set themselves up, because obviously you have, as a part of that scheme, a greater chance of getting your paperwork sorted out with the Belgian authorities. Your visa application and work permit will go through much more smoothly if you have a contract like the newcomer scheme to start out on. But maybe, as I say, you could give the floor to Kathy to say a few words about the scheme that they have at the court.
Absolutely. Just before I do, there was a question asking, and I think there must have been a little bit of confusion because we're all familiar with the system and maybe we haven't quite explained it properly. And there's a question as to whether a freelance position is remote. Well, it's not. You, on the whole, occasionally it may be, but on the whole, you'd be expected to travel to Brussels or Strasbourg or Luxembourg. And now I'll give the floor to Kathy.
Yes, I'd like to explain about the court's trainee scheme. We have an organized traineeship scheme, and the aim is to take people who have just got their interpreting degree and who've applied for the freelance accreditation test and bring them into Luxembourg for, normally it's about 2 months, and just give people who are recent graduates more training, more boost time, in the hope that that gives them a bit of an extra push before they take their accreditation test. And look, it's a good scheme. If you're interested, I'd encourage you to find out and potentially apply. We bring in normally 2 or 3 interpreters at a time. And that means that they can buddy up. So we try to find people with languages that overlap or correspond. Each trainee gets a mentor. And then basically you work as if you're working at the court. So you do dummy booths, obviously in the hearings, but you're given full access to all of the files. You choose your hearings, you do your preparation, and then you go in and do dummy booth in the hearings and really get a feel of what it's like to work for us. It's not paid. You get a stipend, which basically covers your living costs, but you're not going to get rich off the back of it. But it is really worthwhile. We've had great feedback from people who've done it in the past, so I would definitely recommend looking into it.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. I've got a couple of more questions about, somebody is asking whether the administrative support staff are also polyglots. Well, most of them are actually. Because all the languages of the EU member states are official languages. However, the working languages, you know, for staff who are not interpreters are English, French, and German. And who knows, there might be more in the future, although I doubt it for the moment. There are also questions about translation, and I'm not sure we can answer those ones, whether the situation is the same. I'm not sure whether any of you can come in on that. And another question about whether knowledge of politics and finance is very important. I would say yes. And in the old days, like when I applied to do my master's in London, a long time ago, we had to do a test on general culture, and there were 100 questions, and it was a lot of it was about politics and finance. But of course, like we said before, there are many different topics that are discussed alongside those two. Is there anybody who would like to say a few words about translation? Because I'm not very sure. Okay, Kathy?
Look, coming back to what I said before, there definitely is big demand for translators as well at the court, because we're quite specific in our requirements. So if you have a law degree, plus you speak a couple of foreign languages, brilliant. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. And there again, I think you do get a certain amount of training on the job as well, because they really need people who are lawyers first and foremost, and then they help to train you to be able to translate all of that legal documentation from and into the various languages.
And yes, and I've got something from our support staff here on the same issue, saying that yes, I've just remembered too, there are calls for tenders for providing translations as a freelance translator as well. But so yes, that exists too. Let me just see if
it might be useful, Anna, if we just drew everybody's attention to the fact that there is a talk at 2:15 UK time today, so this afternoon, on translation. The title of that is Using Your Language Skills to Forge a Career as a Translator for the EU.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it might be useful if people are interested in more specific translation-related issues, if they try to attend that session.
Yes, absolutely. I've just seen that too. So yeah, for translation, it might be more useful to go to that session. This one is more specifically about interpretation. I'm just checking through the questions that we're getting in the chat and in the questions and answers. And
maybe I could answer the question here about what makes an applicant stand out, and just say a little bit on that subject. And I don't know whether Miguel and Kathy would also like to add something. I mean, essentially, you know, okay, those of us who have been in the job for quite a few years might have quite impressive sounding language combinations. But I think, as you said at the very start, Hannah, That's not how we started out. I mean, I started out with French and Italian, which I did at school and then at university, and that's what I did my master's in interpreting in as well. So I only started out with 2 languages, and basically that's all we need from people when they start out. We know that coming from the UK universities, on the whole, most people have French and Spanish. That's the most common combination, and some people have French and German, or German and Spanish, and occasionally we find people with Italian or with other languages. And that's all we need for people who start out in the profession. So anybody who has that basic qualification and who has the basic language profile, so our eligibility profile for the accreditation test is French or German plus 1 other EU language working into English, and you can find more details about this again on the Europa website. Once you have that basic combination, you are eligible to sit our test, and we recruit people with just 2 languages. Of course, you need to add more languages to make yourself more competitive on the market. So you will get more work if you have a more interesting combination. But as a starting combination, French and 1 other language, or German and 1 other language, is more than enough.
We have another question from someone who has a degree in social work, social science, and works as a court interpreter, if my understanding of the question is correct, and has been a registered court interpreter, I presume, since 2004. They're a native French speaker and work in the UK, so they're wondering if they can apply. I think an extra language would be needed.
Yes, normally 2 languages, and generally the interpreting degree as well.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any special derogations, so to say, for people who are already experienced interpreters and don't have master's degrees? I think for some languages that exists, but I'm not sure if it's the case for English and French, but it's usually for rare languages.
Miguel, would you maybe like to step in on this one?
Not really, but there isn't really an exception. When we screen the files for our tests, the profile that we publish that we're looking for are interpreters, so that people with the first degree and then a master's degree in conference interpreting. There's also the possibility, if you've been working as a conference interpreter for 20 years and don't have a master's degree, but you have to have a first degree, we will also consider that application. And if the person can prove that through contracts, etc., that they have worked at international institutions with conference interpreting services for a long period of time, the file would be admissible. It's quite rare, though. We do find some cases like this, but it's quite rare. The usual profile is then training in conference interpreting, not court interpreting, like the lady who asked about court interpreting, or liaison interpreting, conference interpreting in the 2 techniques of consecutive and simultaneous, and with the language profiles that were clearly explained by my colleague Morag. The language learning, our message really is that you can learn more languages later. You know, all you need at the beginning are 2 languages besides your mother tongue, which is English. We're speaking for English interpretation here, we support the language learning process later, and we work with mainly with at the European Parliament with freelance interpreters. We have a small staff contingent, but the normal career of a conference interpreting is usually freelance interpreting. As to whether UK nationals can apply for staff positions, they certainly can apply at the European Parliament. And then if they are selected, there's a request for derogation, which may or may not be granted. So far, it's always been granted, but we're talking very small numbers here. So I hope that's answered some of the questions I see here.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat from someone who is a graduate, graduated in modern languages, Italian and French in Spain, and their first language is Spanish, and they're wondering whether they'd be eligible. Apparently, well, they have English as well because they're here with us. So I suppose yes, but for the Spanish booth.
Yeah, but
Presumably.
I think you would need to go and check what the requirements are on our website, because I don't know what the profile is for Spanish. I know what the profile is to apply for the English accreditation test with an English A, so mother tongue or native, but I don't know what the requirements are for Spanish. And as things currently stand, obviously Georgian wouldn't count as an EU language. So I'm not sure. You would, again, as I say, have to check on the website.
And also very often, I think the requirements change because depending on how many vacancies, so to say, there are for a specific language combination. So if you check today and you check next year, the requirements might not be the same. And yes, and as for the Georgian language, it's not an EU language, so it wouldn't be used on a daily basis. But like Ukrainian wasn't used, and now it's unfortunately very sought after. Perhaps not in everyday meetings at the EU, but there is certainly a requirement, and there are requirements for Chinese. We also have this whole Chinese scheme running, so it doesn't mean to say that learning a non-EU language is useless. So that's just my addition to the discussion. And I'm just checking to see whether I've overlooked any of the questions here. But at the moment, we seem to be doing fine. So basically, I think most people are wondering where exactly they can find the relevant information on how to apply. And perhaps we could provide some specific email addresses or websites at the end, so that people know where they can apply. And once again, for the training schemes, they're different. So they're not for all the institutions together, but you have to apply to a specific institution. I don't know if anybody would like to add anything. Yes, Miguel?
Yes, I'd just like to make a point in general terms. When we say the EU still needs you, this means that there are careers there for conference interpreters that are native English speakers in all of the EU institutions. The EU institutions together are the biggest employer of interpreters in the world by far, with the most multilingual service. You need two things, basically. You need to have a first degree and a master's degree that qualifies you in conference interpreting, and then you need to have two languages, usually, to get on that degree. I want to underline that we've always had to go to the UK to find our interpreters. By and large, the majority of interpreters in the EU working in our services come from the UK. They also come from other backgrounds, but the core of our service has come traditionally from the UK. So that's the message we want to get out there. There are still jobs. There are many jobs, in fact. Demand is increasing, in fact, for English interpreters. We haven't perhaps spoken enough about the age pyramid, the interpreters that we have on our lists, because once they're accredited, they go on a list where we recruit them from. They're getting older, and that's just how things work, isn't it? People get older, and we need more and more intake in our services. We need more interpreters. If you're looking to train as a conference interpreter, there is information widely available in the universities that offer this type of training, but I would certainly check whether they have a good record of placing their interpreters in the European institutions. You can ask them, do they pass the, do your students get through the accreditation test of the European Union? That's the important question to ask, in my view.
Yes, thank you very much, Miguel. I think it's a very important question indeed, because we have seen over and over again that maybe we have graduates from some schools that, as a rule, don't pass, and others from other schools do. So that's a very, very important thing. That's what you should do when you're shopping around, as it were, for a master's degree. So I think we're slowly moving towards the end of this session. So I would like to give Morag and Kathy the floor as well for the concluding remarks. So who would like to go first? Kathy?
Look, I can start the conclusion and simply say that we've talked a lot about the requirements, but I think we shouldn't overlook here that interpreting is a rewarding job. It's a fun job, and it gives you a great deal. So if you are interested in foreign languages, you want to learn more foreign languages, you like communicating with people from all walks of life and all kinds of different countries and backgrounds, this is definitely something that you should consider, and I would really encourage you to do that.
Okay, thank you. Morag?
Well, I would just very much echo both what Miguel and Kathy have said. Interpreting is a fantastic career, and it still, I think, has a bright future ahead of it. Multilingualism is not going to disappear. English is most certainly not going to disappear. And I would really like to stress the fact that there is high demand. Miguel himself referred to the age pyramid. We are all suffering across all of the institutions from that age pyramid, and we need to replenish our pool of interpreters, both freelance and staff. We don't see enough people passing our accreditation test every year. We are seeing that in the UK, there's a drop in the number of people who are studying foreign languages to degree level, and a drop in the number of people applying for interpreting courses. And that really is a pity, because there are some fantastic opportunities out there. So I hope that this has piqued your interest, and that we'll see some new applications coming in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morag, and I can't but agree with you. And like most, I mean, I have been in this job for a very long time now, and I still go to work in a good mood every day, and I look forward to my working day. The job is interesting. There is a lot of variety, and you work with different people and broaden your horizons in general. So it is a very nice career to have, not to mention the financial side of things as well. Very competitive salaries, particularly in this day and age. To conclude, we are just going to put on a QR code on your screens now. It's going to be shared by our technical staff, and it will give you access to any information that you might still want to have, and we haven't been able to cover in the course of this session. So thank you very, very much for taking part. And we do hope we'll see you one of these days in Brussels. We hope we have at least piqued your curiosity, if not encouraged you enough to come and apply for jobs and work with us one day. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you to my panelists. And well, that's all for us for today. Thank you and goodbye.
All right.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.